Well, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has announced a lower VAT increase of 0.5 percentage point this financial year and another 0.5 percentage point hike in the next financial year. This will then take VAT to 16% in 2026. Some political parties, including the Democratic Alliance, have announced that they will not support the budget speech in its current form. National Treasury says it expects the country's economy to grow by 1.9% in 2025 and to average 1.8% over the next 3 years. Government says it expects a growth recovery to be supported by improved investor confidence, stable electricity supply, lower interest rates and a declining risk premium. Well, to unpack the budget, we are joined by policy writer, researcher and political analyst Roos. Tara, good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Leanne.
So, VAT increase for the first time since 2018. This is what we've been told, to raise an additional 42.5 billion rand over the next two fiscal years. What was your reaction to that?
I think that Minister Godongwana was put in a very difficult position, not just politically speaking in terms of balancing what is going on in the GNU, but overall, there is only so much money circulating currently in the South African economy. And the underlying issue is that our economy is not growing and that our tax base is fundamentally too small. And I think he was placed in a difficult position between balancing the public purse and also public reactions and public outcomes. And for me, the main takeaway, I think that the budget overall was fine. I would give it a 7 out of 10. But the main question we should be asking as South Africans is, what are we going to do to grow the economy? That is the fundamental question. I think that a short-term VAT increase is fine, but it is not a long-term solution because our economy is not growing where it should. We only grew 0.6% in the last quarter, and we're only having a projected growth of 1.9% over the next medium term, where we should be aiming for at minimum 3%. Some economists might argue at 5% looking at our population growth. But fundamentally, if we do not grow our tax base, we will be seeing many more VAT increases in the future.
Yeah, and that's the reality is just, and I'm glad you've said that in general, you know, giving the budget a thumbs up, 7 out of 10. I mean, it's a high mark in anybody's estimation, but This 0.5 percentage point is a big sticking point, and parties within and outside the nation's coalition government say that they won't support plans to raise VAT by any margin. What could be the implications on such a move now? Because we know obviously this needs to be passed by Parliament, and at this point, it doesn't look like it's going to get that 50 plus 1%.
Government is placed in a very difficult position now, and this will be a big test to the GNU as a whole. Thankfully, we will not run out of money. I think that's also been a big scare. From a fiscal standpoint, the budget cannot pass until May. So we have enough time up until May. From then, that is when the real questions begin to answer. But the budget would just continue. The budget from the previous financial year will just continue up until May until the financial recalculations need to happen. But the most important thing now that the budget has been tabled is where are parties going to fall? The DA has taken a hardline stance to say they will absolutely not support this budget. The EFF has said they will only vote for the budget if they can formally enter the GNU. And that means that the DA has then said they will leave the GNU. So it depends on where the ANC is going to get the votes from now. I do not think that MK will vote for this budget. Their last line is the EFF. Whether or not they will decide to take that chance and go with the EFF instead of the DA is yet to be seen. But it places the DA specifically in a very tough position because in my personal opinion, I do not think that they're going to leave the GNU over this budget. But whether the ANC can convince the EFF to push the budget over the line in order for the financial year to start on the 1st of April, does that not then put the DA in a position in which they're just seen as propping up the ANC? And if they cannot get their way politically, the ANC will just seek out votes other way. The only political party in the GNU that I think who might stand with the DA and not vote with this budget is the Freedom Front Plus. But I'm almost certain that the Patriotic Alliance will support this budget. I'm almost certain the Good Party will support the budget. Where Mzansi stands is yet to be seen. I do not think that other parties outside of the GNU will support the budget either, but it really comes down to the political game and what the ANC decides to do.
Well, I mean, it is a political game. It certainly is, but it's a game that is played against the average South African, because nobody escapes VAT. And this, Tara, is the reality of it all, is that it doesn't matter what you buy. Obviously, there's the basket of exempt goods, which perhaps we could have seen increasing during this budget, because it's very hard on South Africans at the moment who are just not making ends meet. And now, no matter what way you look at it, whatever you buy is going to cost more. And this is a very big situation for South Africans.
Absolutely. I do think the budget has made large strides in an effort to try and create an environment for economic growth to occur. But I think that at a cabinet level, there does need to be a larger discussion on what the various sectors plan to do. I mean, we see large-scale spending over transport and logistics, energy, water, and sanitation. But as we know, those three key areas are also areas in which there are high levels of corruption. We're allocating 402 billion to transport and logistics in an effort to alleviate the stress on business. But how does the construction mafia play a role in that? What oversight measures is going to be put in place now that we have the GNU in place to make sure that the previous issues we saw from other administrations do not filter down into the next? And that is a big role that we need to see political parties now come together. I understand that the DA does not want to support this budget, and they have every right not to, but they also hold key ministries. What is DPWI going to do? What is the Department of Basic Education going to do? Because if this budget passes, whether the DA likes it or not, they're still going to have to implement it. And they need to look at how they are going to make something good come out of a bad situation from their perspective.
I mean, economists have raised alarm bells. They've voiced concerns that more tax hikes to raise revenue will likely have the opposite effect and not grow the economy but hurt the economy more. Do you think government should, as what I'm gathering from you is what you're saying, is what a lot of people have been saying, cut on spending, don't spend so much, as opposed to try and find it from people that just don't have money?
Absolutely. I do think that we need to cut on spending. But if you run the numbers, I mean, if we had to cut all deputy ministers out of the current cabinet, that would only save us about 2 billion. So you had to factor in DDGs and merge a few departments that could be merged. We're looking at most about 6 billion rand. The current budget as it stands is 3 trillion. And so I understand we do need to cut on wasteful expenditure, but the government options, you borrow. Currently, we cannot do that. We already owe too much money, and every single day we are paying exorbitant amounts to debt servicing costs. You tax, which is what the government is decided to do, or you cut. The big problem that we face now, and we find ourselves in a perpetual cycle, because we are overspending because we do not have enough money to spend. And it comes down to the fundamental question that there are many things that the government should do and could do. We also need to recuperate money that was lost from state capture. We need to see the MPA drive convictions, and because that is also another perpetual issue to why we find ourselves in this current situation. There are many different factors at play, but the fundamental issue is that our economy is not growing. We cannot have 7.1 million people support 70 million people. It is not something that is sustainable. It's not something that is logistically possible. And we do need to cut wasteful expenditure, but fundamentally we need to grow the economy.
Yeah, I mean, wasteful expenditure is a topic on its own, and it is, I mean, it runs into billions, and it is a major problem. And I think you've highlighted them well. But honestly, the crux of the entire issue lies in the fact that this economy is not growing and jobs are not being created. And this is at the center of all of the issues. How can we grow this economy? I mean, what would you suggest that we do? I
think that currently, as it stands, the biggest problem we have in South Africa is implementation. This is a good budget. The ideas are good, and the ideas have always been good. But what we lack is implementation and critical oversight. And that, to me, is the biggest test of how the 7th administration will be different from every administration before that. It's all good and well to put 19 billion rand into education in order to retain 11,000 teachers. It's all good and well to increase ECD funding. I think they're going from 17 Rand a day to 24 Rand a day per child, and that will then increase expenditure to about 700,000 children. But how is that going to be implemented? Are those teachers actually going to be retained? Are we going to see that impact in ECD centers? How is these things going to be implemented at a fundamental level? So to me, that is the biggest test. Corruption is a massive scale issue, but also the lack of implementation and the lack of strategic decisions by departments in itself. I think that a lot of test and strain has been put on Minister Godongwana because he is a Minister of Finance and it is a critical portfolio. But at large, how is Cabinet going to act on what they have now been given? I do think this is a true test of the ministers in the GNU to see, because it is ultimately their job to drive economic growth. The private sector cannot create jobs if there is not a stable economic environment. Investors cannot invest if the country is not investable. And so that is the true test now, is whether or not the public sector can come to and meet the private sector halfway in order for us to restart the economy.
So I leave the interview on this note because there's so much more I want to ask you. But let's say you've got the opportunity to ask the minister a question himself, because we do have him in the next hour here on the program. What would you say to him? What would you ask him?
If the budget does not get the votes that it needs to, what is the backup plan come May when the money runs out? Because that is a big question. Because if the ANC cannot push this budget over the line, we're fine until May. We can continue until May. But what happens when we get to May and the money runs out? Because then I think the alarm bells should start ringing.
Yeah, love that. Okay, done. You've helped me. I'm going to ask him that one. And I think a lot of people would want to know that, because there's a real chance that it may not go ahead. And how do we fill that gap? Tara, thank you. Thanks for talking to us. Tara Roos is a political writer, researcher, and political analyst. She's unpacked the 2025 budget that was announced yesterday by the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Of course, it now goes into parliamentary committees. Parliament needs to vote on it before it's passed. So it's not that you're going to see this increase happening this morning.